Hello and welcome to the second edition of the Yasmin El-Rufai Foundation Fiction Writing Lessons. Today we're going to talk about plot. In the previous episode, we talked about characters and characterization. Plot is equally important. You can make your character as engaging and as interesting as possible, but that personality alone cannot carry your story. You need a storyline, which is the plot. In talking about characters, we agreed that we need to make our characters as realistic as possible, as close to human beings as possible. But with plot is different from real life. There are major differences between plot and real life. Real life is boring. There's no sequence, things happen at random, and there are no cause and effect. It's also about 1,000 different things. But when you're writing a story, when you want to plot a story, you have to make it interesting. There has to be cause and effect. You shouldn't include boring day-to-day activities. That's what separates plot from real life. For example, you can have a story where a boy comes back from school and finds that his pet canary is missing. He decides to go out to retrieve it. He goes out. Then there, just in front of his door, he finds the bird and brings it back in. That is real life, it happens. But that is not a good plot. A good plot would be where the boy comes home from school, finds that his pet bird is missing, he goes out to retrieve it. In his excitement, he doesn't watch left and right, he crosses the street. A motorbike rider knocks him off, and he wakes up in the hospital having lost all of his memory. That is plot. So with plot, there has to be cause and effect. There has to be sequence of events. One thing causes another, and that thing leads to something else. And as you're plotting, you have to make the conflict escalate. There should be escalating conflict. Then the next thing about plot is what is called the major dramatic question. The major dramatic question is related to your protagonist's goal. What does your protagonist want? What is her goal or her desire? So the question would be, will she achieve that goal? For instance, in Purple Hibiscus, we know that Kambili's goal is to be free from her father so that she can be like any other normal young girl. So the major dramatic question in this book is, will Kambili achieve her goal? Will she be able to get the freedom that she so desires, that she so much desires? That is the major dramatic question. And at the end of your book, at the end of your story, there must be some kind of resolution to that. The major dramatic question will be related to your protagonist's goal. And the answer to that question can be yes, it can be no, or it can be maybe. It can be yes, your protagonist has achieved her goal. It can be no, she has not been able to achieve, or you can even leave it as maybe. But it has to be answered one way or the other. Then the other thing is you must always avoid what is known as Deus ex machina, which means an act of God to resolve your conflicts. For instance, giving an example still of Kambili in Purple Hibiscus, she is desirous of having her freedom. And The major antagonist to that is her own father, who is very controlling. Now, you have to resolve these issues from the actions of the characters themselves. It will be a lazy way of resolution. If, for instance, one rainy day, her father goes out, a lightning strikes him and he dies, and thus she is free. That is an act of God. It's lazy. It's a lazy way of resolving an issue. So the Deus ex machina is when a hopeless situation is solved by an unexpected occurrence, an act, a random act. It is a contrived plot device and is considered lazy. So you should always avoid that. The next thing about plot is that plot has a structure. There's a structure to a plot. A plot has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning should give the necessary background, but it should only be the necessary background. You are not supposed to just inundate your reader with all the background to the story. But there is a necessity to give some background to your story. And this beginning is what takes the reader to the middle of the action. And it is at this beginning point that you establish the major dramatic question. What is your protagonist's desire? Will she be able to achieve that? Then we go to the middle. The middle, of course, is usually the one that takes up the most number of pages. It does most of the work. This is where you do most of the exposition about your novel. You know, you do further developments about the character, the situation. So the middle takes up most of the structure, and then we come to the end. The end is usually the shortest part. The end is usually the shortest part. The end is also where you have what is called the denouement. The denouement is the resolution to all the conflicts that you've put out there. So that ending is usually the shortest, and this is where all the things come together. The crisis, climax, the consequences, and the ending, the inevitable ending, and that's where you answer your major dramatic question. Even though the structure of the novel is beginning, middle, and end, there's no really hard and fast rule as to how you write your novel. But it's important to know the rules, because when you know the rules, then you can safely break them. Recently, I read a novel by El-Rufai, which is called 10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world. And the beginning of the novel is when the protagonist was wounded and was dying. So we start that novel with the protagonist dying. And within the 10 minutes, 38 seconds that it takes her to lose consciousness, we go back to the story of how she came about to be in that situation. From the time she was born, she grew up, she ran away from home. So you see, you can play with it any way you want, but first of all, know the rules, then you know how to break the rules. Then there's the issue of subplots. With the novel, you usually have what is called subplots. The subplot is another story that runs along with the main plot of your story. Because of the length of a novel, it's possible to have subplots. For instance, in Purple Hibiscus, we know the main plot and we know the main character. But alongside that, we have different stories. We have the story of Kambili's auntie and the fact that she lost her husband and she's struggling to bring up her children all on her own. So usually you find in a novel, apart from the main story, there are subplots that run along the line. And that subplot, it may concern the main character. It may also be another character aside from the main character. So basically in a novel, you can have subplots. You have more space for exposition, which is what is different from plotting in a short story. In a short story, because of the length of a short story, you still have the same structure, which is beginning, middle, and end. But because of the length, the shorter length, as opposed to the length of a novel, you don't have the luxury of doing so much exposition or getting subplots to run along the main story. So that's the major difference in plotting between a short story and a novel. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the lecture. Remember, whatever you do, keep writing.